please welcome Hannah Sell, Deputy General Secretary of the Socialist Party.
Comrades, in the Communist Manifesto, published in another era of revolution, the then young authors, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, explained the job of people like us, of the socialists, the communists, the Marxists. And what they said was that we have to fight tenaciously for the attainment of the immediate aims, for the momentary interests of the working class. But in the movement of the present, we also have to represent and take care of the future of that movement. You can find that quote, by the way, not only in the Communist Manifesto, but at the beginning of a very good new book, which you can buy at Socialism 2019 this weekend, which is a description or a report of a vital battle in defence of our ideas in which we have been involved in the last year. And that quote really sums up our role, the essence of what we do. But I think we have all experienced that 2019 up until now has not been the easiest time to play that role. Yes, we have been intervening in important strikes against low-pay, casualisation, bullying bosses. We have taken part in the magnificent, predominantly young, mass protests against climate change. We are involved day to day in campaigning to scrap universal credit, to stop evictions, to stop the council cuts being carried out by both Labour and Tory councils. And we know, we've heard tonight, there have been victories in a whole number of those important local struggles. And with the magnificent CWU ballot result, the UCU ballot result, there is the prospect of more victories. And it is also true, it is our experience, that the dominant mood in society is a deep-seated anger against the existing order. There isn't time, as Peter said, to describe everything that order means. But an order where for now, for example, you can go into Waterstones or any mainstream bookshop and you can go to the preschool section and buy a book about why your mummy can't afford to eat breakfast and the trip to the food bank. So normal has semi-starvation of the poorest sections of the working class become. An order where you have the horror of Grenfell, the role of the private profiteers in the construction industry, the penny pinching of a Tory council, and yet they try and get away with blaming the firefighters. And there's anger against all of that and more. No different to the anger we are seeing on the streets in Chile, in the Lebanon, in Iraq, in other countries. But it hasn't had an outlet. And the dominant mood this year has really been, I would say, one of a kind of sullen anger but lack of confidence that it's possible to change anything. For many workers, whether they voted Leave or Remain, the fog of Brexit is hanging over everything. It's clear to us that a step forward for the working class would be to get this Tory government out of office and for the election of a Corbyn-led government in the general election. We've been campaigning for that all year. And as Peter said, if the trade union leaders had lifted their little fingers and fought for it, this weak, divided government would have been thrown out of office long ago. Nonetheless, I think we have all experienced that many workers who agree with us on universal credit, who agree with us on Grenfell or the CWU strike, do not, at the moment, agree with us about the possibility or the positive character of a Corbyn-led government. And we understand that. We are not the kind of so-called socialists who blame the working class for being sceptical of a Corbyn-led government, who write them off as being racist or backward or any of the other arguments that get pulled forward by some on the left. We understand we live in a capitalist society where the capitalist politicians, including those in the Labour Party, and the capitalist media rain down insults and attacks on Corbyn, and that they are bound to have an effect, above all, because of the failure of the left leadership of the Labour Party to effectively answer them. Other speakers have talked tonight about how we explained Corbyn's election did not transform Labour into a workers' party, but changed it, if you like, into two parties in one. To be a bit more precise, it changed Labour into two potential parties, a potential anti-austerity party around Jeremy Corbyn, and then a pretty fully formed pro-capitalist party around the Blairites. And as we have warned at every stage, Corbyn and the Labour leadership strategy of attempting to pacify that capitalist wing of the Labour Party, to compromise with them, it's never going to work. Look at the vote for the general election. 11 Labour MPs voted against a general election. 100 of them didn't bother to vote. And they say, oh, we forgot, or the whip told us the wrong thing and we didn't mean to. And maybe you could think that might be true. But then look at who they are. Look at that 100. Margaret Hodge, Stella Creasy, Jess Phillips. The arch Blairites are determined to wreck Corbyn's chances of winning a general election, and were showing it again in that vote that took place. It doesn't work when you're faced with false accusations that Corbyn has brought anti-Semitism into the Labour Party, to have a solution of bowing down, of suspending a left Labour MP, Chris Williamson, because he very, very politely said that maybe there were some lies being told about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. If you bow down instead of standing up and answering those kind of lies, they are bound to take root. And we know, in the run-up to this general election, there have been quite serious mistakes made by the left leadership of the Labour Party. Instead of fighting tooth and nail for a general election, they've been too much sucked in to parliamentary manoeuvres, which give the appearance of being part of a rebel alliance with the likes of Ken Clarke, the man who was in every single Thatcher government, or with Joe Swinson, who took part in the Condemn Coalition, the most vicious pro-austerity government since the 1930s. And that has given credence amongst some workers that Johnson is standing up for the people against the elite in Parliament. Rubbish, of course, absolute and total rubbish, but it has allowed the lie to get a certain echo. And those mistakes mean this is not the most favourable terrain for Corbyn to fight a general election. There's no question. There are doubts among many workers, which at root, even if they're not expressed like this, are, if you can't even stand up to the capitalists in your own party, are you going to stand up and fight for our interests against the bosses in government? That is the kind of gut feeling that exists amongst big sections of the working class. But let's be clear. In 2017, in the snap election, Labour began on 25% in the polls, the same as they are today. They went on not to win, but to win an extra 3.5 million votes. We argued at the time that if Corbyn came out fighting on a socialist programme, he could win the general election. And let's remember, nobody believed us. The Corbynites didn't believe us. Everybody thought we were heading for a Tory landslide, but the election proved otherwise. This is going to be a very unpredictable general election we're going into. And after all All elections are only a photograph, a moment in time, in a moving picture of class struggle. But nonetheless, it is already clear the Tories are not going to get it all their own way in trying to make this an election that is just about Brexit. Johnson is already turning up in hospitals and being chased out by the staff, the patients and the visitors. And Corbyn's election launch was not the kind of mass rally he should have organised. But nonetheless, it was not a bad beginning in saying that there are 150 billionaires in the UK and 14 million people living in poverty, and that he will fight for a society where there are neither billionaires nor people living in poverty, of pledging to scrap universal credit and end tuition fees, promising a £10 an hour minimum wage for all, regardless of age, and to nationalise mail, rail and energy. If he builds on that and puts a fighting socialist programme, like in 2017, there will be workers up and down the country who won't forget their scepticism of Corbyn, but will start to think, we have a chance of a government that might get me a council house, that might get me a decent wage, that might mean I don't have to work on a zero-hour contract anymore, and therefore it's worth coming out to support them. If Corbyn stands on a clear anti-austerity programme, combined with making clear that he is not standing for Remain, yes, he can put a deal to a confirmatory referendum, but he makes clear that he will fight for a Brexit in workers' interests and will put that to a referendum with his red lines, as we have explained, being no privatisation, no anti-worker laws, and all of the rest of it. If he takes that approach, we could have a Jeremy Corbyn-led government on the 12th of December. And in the Socialist Party, as we did in 2017, we will be out on the streets, in the workplaces, in the university campuses, fighting for the election of such a government. But we are the element of the future in the movement of the present. And it is not our job just to do that. We also have to prepare for what comes beyond the 12th of December. And of course, that includes the possibility that Johnson manages to wangle himself a small majority. So let's be clear on this. That would be an extremely weak government. A government coming to power against the background of a growing economic crisis. A government, as 3 cabinet ministers have written in a book, with the intention of turning Britain into Singapore-on-Thames. And what do they mean by that? We know what they mean, because they've put it in their Brexit deal. They mean the ripping up of the few workers' rights that we have, the opening up of the NHS to the US, private companies, and so on. They do that, though. They will face massive opposition. What we've seen in Brazil, the right-wing populist Bolsonaro thought he was a mighty, powerful ruler. And then we saw a 47 million strong general strike against him within months of being elected. So that is one possibility. But of course, another, and what we will fight for, is that Corbyn is able to win that election. And that will just be the beginning. Why do we always raise, as Peter raised with a little more hair than he has today on the film earlier on, the necessity of the nationalisation of the commanding heights of the economy, the major corporations and the banks? We raise it because we understand, modest as Corbyn's programme is, the capitalist class would not sit back and allow him to implement it. They would do everything within their power to sabotage a Corbyn-led government. And therefore, we know many workers will think what you're raising goes too far, it's utopian. But we understand the only way, the only practical way to really build a society for the many, not the few, is to take the commanding heights of the economy into democratic public ownership and to break the power of the capitalist class. Now, Corbyn's programme is quite modest by historical standards. But I don't think we should underestimate how far it still terrifies the capitalist class. Read their papers this week. City AM, the free newspaper for city workers, had an editorial about how Corbyn is launching a vicious class war against them, and then going on for plans of how to get their money out of the country. Why are they so terrified? Well, there's two reasons. The first is they don't want to give up a penny. No matter how much is modest his programme, they don't want the working class to gain anything. But there's a second and more fundamental reason. They're frightened. They're frightened that not Corbyn is launching a vicious class war, but the election of a government led by him could raise the confidence of the working class in this country to conduct a class war, unlike the one we've got at the moment, where the rich are winning, where we win that class war. Now, it's true that a section of the bosses appear more relaxed about a Corbyn-led government this time. The Economist, for example, today has an article about it, saying maybe it wouldn't be that bad after all, some of the bosses are saying. There's two reasons they give. One is they really don't like Johnson's Brexit deal. It's not good for their profits. But the other reason is because they don't think Corbyn can win a majority. And therefore, any of his radical demands will not be implemented because he would be in coalition with the SNP and the Liberal Democrats. What does that show us? First of all, that Corbyn has to absolutely stick by the position that him and McDonnell have put so far, that they will not enter a coalition government. They will not govern together with capitalist parties. Does that mean we're saying that if Corbyn doesn't get a majority, he has to step back and just be the opposition? If Labour comes out of this general election as the biggest party? Absolutely not. He would have to take that platform, fight for his programme, and call on the working class to back him. I would suggest that you all go back and read about the first Labour government, a minority Labour government in 1924, not for what it did, but for what Leon Trotsky said it should have done. And I just want to give a quote. He says, "It does not have a majority in government, but that does not mean the situation is totally hopeless. There is a way out. We only need to have the will to fight for it." What if McDonald's said, "We are going to nationalise the bloodsuckers' lands, mines and railways. With the resources released by the abolition of the monarchy, we are going to undertake the construction of housing for the workers." He says, Trotsky, "In Britain, 3/4 of the population is working class. If MacDonald walked into Parliament, laid his programme on the table, rapped lightly with his knuckles, and said, 'Accept it or I'll drive you all out,'" Trotsky then says he could say it more politely if he liked. If he did that, Britain would be unrecognisable in 2 weeks. MacDonald would win a majority in any election. Now that has an enormous relevance for today, not just because of the prospect of a Corbyn minority government, but also because, let's be clear, even if Labour wins a majority, it will be a minority government for the anti-austerity part of the Labour Party, because they will be surrounded by pro-capitalist MPs. That does not mean accepting those constraints. We have to fight to use that platform to fight for a programme in the interests of the working class and to mobilise the working class in support of it. And as Marion said, we have to prepare the trade union movement to fight for a programme in the interests of the working class in the face of every hesitation and retreat that comes from the top. Now, standing here, nearly 6 weeks before a general election, it is not possible to predict how events are going to develop. But we can say some things with certainty. We can say that if Corbyn comes out fighting, he will get an echo from the working class and from sections of the middle class. We can say for certain that after a general election, whether he's won it or not, the capitalist class are going to do everything they can to sabotage his programme, and if he's lost, and they can, to get rid of him from the leadership of the Labour Party. And we can say with absolute certainty that the working class in Britain and internationally remains the most powerful force, the only force capable of fighting for the fundamental transformation of society. It gets confirmed from unusual sources. A couple of weeks ago, the US paper, the Washington Post, produced a survey of 100 years of 150 revolutions and revolts. And they'd gone into them all and they'd studied them. And this was their only conclusion, the thread that ran through it all. The difference between whether they won or whether they lost was whether the working class was actively involved. And they're absolutely right. And the final thing that I will say, we can say with certainty, is that the Socialist Party, as will our comrades around the world in the CWI, will go from this hall today and we will fight tenaciously to build a mass revolutionary party, a party that fights for every immediate step forward for the working class, as we did in Liverpool and we do every day, but also always puts central the need for the overthrow of capitalism and the socialist transformation of society in order to build a new democratic order that can meet the needs of all humanity.